The story begins with a young boy, Leo Carter, whose life is a daily struggle on the streets. Despite his challenging circumstances, Leo exemplifies remarkable bravery and selflessness. Fate intervenes one fateful evening when Leo stumbles upon a man in distress, Richard Donovan, a wealthy entrepreneur who had been bitten by a venomous snake while seeking solace from his demanding life. Richard had just left a tense meeting and decided to drive away from the city in search of peace. His luxury Maybach sped along a narrow countryside road, his mind cluttered with numbers, contracts, and the mounting pressure of his work. As the road stretched out before him, Richard sighed. "How long has it been since I stopped to breathe?" he muttered. The sight of a golden wheat field caught his attention, and unable to resist the allure, he pulled his car to the side of the road and stepped out. The tranquil countryside seemed to promise the escape he so desperately needed. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wild grass, and for a moment, Richard felt a flicker of calm. As he walked along a dirt path, the polished leather of his shoes quickly gathered dust. Just as he paused to take a deep breath, a sharp pain shot through his ankle. "Ah!" Richard cried out, jerking his leg back. Looking down, he saw a small brown snake slither into the tall grass, leaving behind two tiny red puncture marks on his skin. Panic set in as Richard realized he'd been bitten by a snake. His mind raced, recalling vague advice about staying calm and slowing the spread of venom. But fear clouded his judgment. He fumbled for his phone only to discover there was no signal. Desperation overtook him as he tried to hobble back to his car. But the venom's effects began to take hold. His leg throbbed, numbness crept upward, and each step became increasingly difficult. Finally, Richard collapsed to the ground, cold sweat breaking out over his face. "Help! Someone help me!" he shouted. But the open fields answered only with silence. Just when all hope seemed lost, faint footsteps echoed in the distance. A figure emerged on the horizon, moving quickly toward him. As the figure approached, Richard could see a boy of about 14 years old with messy brown hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore an old t-shirt and jeans, looking as though he had just returned from an adventure. "Are you okay?" the boy called out, his voice steady. Richard struggled to speak. Snake bite," he stammered, pointing weakly to his leg. Without hesitation, the boy crouched down to examine the wound. "You've been bitten by a snake," the boy said, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to act quickly." Who are you?" Richard whispered, barely able to stay conscious. "My name's Leo," the boy replied. "My father's a medic. I've seen him handle emergencies before. Don't worry, I'll help you." Richard doubted the boy could do much to save him, but with no other options, he nodded weakly. Leo quickly got to work, his small hands moving with precision. He tore a strip of fabric from his t-shirt to use as a makeshift tourniquet, tying it tightly around Richard's thigh to slow the venom's spread. "This will hurt, but it's necessary," Leo said, tightening the band with a nearby stick. Richard groaned in pain but nodded in understanding. "Where did you learn this?" Richard asked, his voice faint. "My dad taught me first aid," Leo replied as he adjusted Richard's position, making sure the injured leg was lower than his heart. "But I've never dealt with a venomous snake bite before. We need to get you to a hospital fast." Despite his growing fatigue, Leo scanned the area for any sign of help. The countryside was vast and empty, with no buildings or cars in sight. He turned back to Richard. "I'm going to carry you," he said firmly. Richard's eyes widened. You can't. I'm too heavy for you." "Doesn't matter," Leo replied. "I'm not leaving you here." With determination, Leo hoisted Richard onto his back. Despite his thin frame, the boy's resolve gave him strength. He stumbled forward, each step a monumental effort. "We can only rely on each other out here," Leo said, his voice strained but steady. Darkness fell, and the dirt path grew treacherous. Leo's legs trembled under the weight, but he refused to stop. Richard, barely conscious, whispered, "You don't have to do this, kid." "Yes, I do," Leo shot back, his voice sharp with determination. "I'm not letting you die." Finally, The faint glow of headlights appeared in the distance. Leo's heart leapt with hope. Summoning his last reserves of energy, he stepped onto the road and waved his arms frantically. "Help! Please! Stop!" he shouted. The car slowed, its bright headlights illuminating the desperate scene. A man stepped out, his expression one of shock and concern. "What happened?" he asked. "He's been bitten by a snake." Leo explained quickly. "We need to get him to a hospital." Without hesitation, the man helped Leo lift Richard into the car. As they sped down the road, Leo sat in the back seat, clutching Richard's hand and whispering words of encouragement. "Stay awake, Mr. Donovan. We're almost there." At the hospital, medical staff rushed Richard into the emergency room. Leo stood outside the doors, his small frame sagging with exhaustion, but his mind still racing with worry. Hours passed before a doctor emerged with news. "He's stable now," the doctor said, placing a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. "You saved his life. If you hadn't acted so quickly, the outcome could have been very different." Leo exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he murmured, though he knew the real gratitude belonged to Richard for holding on. Days later, Richard, now fully recovered, couldn't stop thinking about the boy who had saved him, determined to find him. He used every resource at his disposal. It wasn't long before his search led him to a modest home on the outskirts of the city. Richard's Maybach pulled up to the house, its sleek frame out of place against the rustic backdrop. He knocked on the door, and a woman answered, her expression wary but polite. "Hello," Richard began. "I'm looking for Leo. He saved my life, and I need to thank him." The woman hesitated before calling out, "Leo, someone's here to see you." Leo appeared, his face lighting up with recognition. "Mr. Donovan?" Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Leo, I can't thank you enough. You didn't just save my life. You reminded me what truly matters." Leo shrugged modestly. "I just did what anyone would have done." But Richard shook his head. "No, Leo, what you did was extraordinary, and I want to repay you. Anything you or your family need, just name it." Leo's mother stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "We're grateful for your kindness." But Leo didn't do this expecting anything in return. Richard smiled. "I understand, but if there's ever a way I can help, please let me know." Over time, Richard kept his promise, finding small but meaningful ways to support Leo and his family. He ensured Leo had access to quality education and opportunities to pursue his dreams. But more than that, the bond between them grew into a profound friendship, built on gratitude, courage, and the shared understanding of life's true value. Leo's bravery that night didn't just save Richard's life. It sparked a chain of events that transformed both of their worlds. Richard learned to slow down and appreciate the humanity around him, while Leo discovered that even the smallest acts of courage could lead to incredible opportunities. Years later, at a ceremony where Leo was being honored for his academic achievements and community work, Richard sat proudly in the audience, clapping louder than anyone else. The two had become more than savior and saved. They had become family. Their story reminds us that kindness and bravery, no matter how small, have the power to change lives and create lasting bonds. In the end, it's not wealth or status that defines us, but the choices we make to lift one another up.